Hey everybody, it's Renee with Reset with Renee, joining you live here on Instagram. I'll post it later, probably to my podcast and YouTube channels, but I had inspiration while I was doing my workout this morning and wanted to take some time to share with you all a little bit about my backstory. So that's what I'm going to share, but a little context. As I was scrolling social media this morning, I saw Elizabeth Gilbert on Facebook posting about Eat, Pray, Love. The movie Eat, Pray, Love was based off of her book and her story, and she's having the 20th anniversary year for that. And that makes me smile a little bit because just last night I was struggling with some allergy fatigue. I really wanted to go out and meet some friends for happy hour, but my social battery was on red. And so stayed in. My boyfriend came over and we watched that movie. He had not seen it. He's getting extra points this week for watching Barbie over the weekend and then Eat, Pray, Love last night. So, and I appreciate that because for Eat, Pray, Love, it really speaks to parts of me and parts of my story. So I'm going to share a little bit about that and tie it into, of course, some of the work that I do with my clients. So bear with me. This might twist and turn a little bit, but we'll get there eventually. So I first saw the movie, I think it came out in 2010. I was still married and living in St. Louis, but unhappily married and really struggling and conflicted in dealing with, I had marital ambivalence for years. Went to individual therapy, went to couples therapy, did all the things trying to hold on to that marriage and not hurt anybody. But of course, when we deny our truth and reality, we end up hurting people anyway. So that the movie really spoke to me then. And then fast forward, I left my husband in 2017. Our divorce was final in 2018. And so that movie's been kind of like one of my go-tos, like divorce anthem movies, if you will. So I think part of getting to know people, is like, what do they like to read? What are their favorite plants? What are their favorite flowers? What are their favorite books? What are their favorite movies? What are the things that speak to them? And so this movie is one of those things that has spoken to me. And a couple months ago, maybe it was even a year ago, I heard Liz Gilbert on the We Can Do Hard Things podcast talking about her journey. And I've kind of loosely followed that over the years. But she was talking about, the idea of having love or sex addiction and recovering from that. And so I'm not going to go into love and sex addiction per se, but more generally speak about people who get into unhealthy relationships or even, worst case scenario, trauma bond relationships. Typically do so because there's a part of them that's carrying some wounding around attachment or abandonment. So they have an attachment or abandonment wound. And oftentimes when you have that, it's because you've experienced that early on in your developmental history. And then once that started, if there's not healing brought to that, then it tends to happen repeatedly. And so folks that have that wound, and I relate to that 100%, you tend to have wounding around relationships, attachment, love, and sex. So when I work with people around this, and as I've done my own healing journey, it's been difficult. So some of my healing around that has really taken some time because when you have that kind of injury, and this is what I see in the folks that I work with who have CPTSD. So they're working on their recovery. All those injuries that they sustained, those wounds, they have buried them. I call it like an archaeological dig. So they are buried so deep within their psyche, so deep within their body, that is really difficult to access them unless there's something that's activating that wound. And I'll add, when you're a therapist, when you're in mental health, when you're a coach working in the healing arts, when you have all that education and experience and you cognitively know better and you know what you should be doing and what kind of people you should be with or are looking for in your relationship on one hand, but then yet you find yourself in a relationship that isn't right for you, you know you should leave, you know it isn't good enough. When you have that trauma wound, the attachment wound, the abandonment wound, there's typically a different part, separate from over here, your smart brain parts, that don't want to let go. All they've ever wanted is attachment, love, connection. And so they will hold on and they will not let go. And so that creates a lot of conflict for folks. So I wanted to name that. That can really be a journey. And then there's often a shame about that. You know you should be doing better and yet you can't make yourself do it, shame comes up. So that's something that I work with a lot of my clients. And then another piece I wanted to share with you, so there's two more pieces, but one is I'm in a healing container as a client right now, and we just this past week did a forgiveness ceremony. And I did a lot of personal pre-work working up to that. I shared on Instagram. I did the Pearl Dive with the IPI group, did some personal work in that. I did a breathwork session earlier this week in the program I'm a part of, and that kind of laid the ground for what the forgiveness ceremony was. There was some pre-ceremony homework that I did, and so the directions, for us in that program was to think of someone that you want to forgive or you're holding bitterness towards. And so I show up for the forgiveness ceremony and they're like, okay, does that person come to mind? I'm like, I have a roster, like not just one people, several people. I have people from my family I've been wanting to forgive for a long time. I have people in love relationships that I've had in the past that I've wanted to forgive and let go of some of the bitterness because of the hurt. And I have some work situations that were really harmful to me. And it's been really hard to process that, to transmute that, to let it go. And for me, I needed to move through a grief process before I could get to forgiveness. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the forgiveness. And the reason, full circle coming back to the movie, there's a scene in the movie where her friend, Richard, I think his name is, tells her, you need to forgive yourself for your divorce. You need to forgive yourself. And that scene where he shares his story and then she does her meditation where she forgives herself for her divorce has always brought me to tears on two counts. One, the divorce part, because you don't, I've not talked to anyone who wanted to really cause hurt and harm when they left their relationship. Sure, people do. I did. And there are people who are consciously and unconsciously creating harm. Those are different people. Those typically aren't my clients. My clients are the folks that are like gutted because they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to cause hurt and harm. So that scene always touches me. And then Richard in the scene sharing about his personal story always touches me because it reminds me of my dad who had alcoholism, and he's a primary person for my abandonment and attachment wounding and trauma. And he passed in 2018, and I'm been on a slow healing journey with that. So I'll say something more about that. But for folks who have loved ones with addiction, it can be hard to see past the problem behaviors that come up with addiction and to see the humanness. And I think that scene does a good job of showing that, just how much shame a person with addiction is carrying inside, really to begin with. And then the problems that their addiction causes adds a whole nother layer of shame. And so some folks are so shame-filled, the only option they see is to totally disconnect from the people that they love because they don't want to keep feeling that pot of shame each time they're around the people they care about. So those scenes are really impactful for me personally. So this forgiveness ceremony, back to my roster, being guided through that forgiveness ceremony, what my pearl wisdom was basically, hey, these people that have caused hurt, who've hurt my feelings, who've hurt my heart, they're not operating on the same plane as I am. They have a different value set than I do. And kind of doing all the work to get to that point and to see that was a way to help release me from them and move on. So release and move on. But it sounds easy, but for someone who's been hurt, it requires a lot of emotional labor. So I think forgiveness is a good goal to get to, but it can be a process and a journey, and I don't think anyone should be expected to get there just like that. They should be invited to. It's a release for them, not for the person who hurt or harmed them, really, but for them. And then the last piece I'll mention is loss and death. You know, I have a loved one who lost a family member this week, and so they're on my heart. And then, you know, going back to the movie, divorce is a death. It's the death of life that you know. It's a death of the dreams that you had for yourself and your family moving forward. And it's impactful, and it doesn't stop just because the divorce decree was signed. You know, every member of the family continues to move on, grow, and develop developmentally. And so it's a process that keeps unfolding, and there can be pockets of grief within that. So whether it's a divorce or a breakup or a death, I like the languaging from Eat, Pray, Love. You know, when you think of that person that you loved or that you still love, send them, miss them, let yourself love them, let yourself miss them. And when you think about them, send them light and love. And with my dad, for instance, that's been a big part of my healing journey with him. And that's even hard to articulate even at this point in time without becoming emotional. So I hope that some of this lands for someone, someone who has gone through the divorce process or has been in a trauma bonded relationship, other wounded healers, other folks with CPTSD, or other folks who are, you know, moving through breakup, loss, death, and grief. So that's what I have for you all. Thank you for listening to my story. And as always, I invite you to work with me and to reach out to Reset. Talk to you soon.